The sky was gray and heavy as the long black car rolled up the gravel path leading to Ferndale Estate. It was a grand old house, the kind with more windows than you could count and chimneys that reached into the clouds. The walls were white stone, worn but strong, and the front door was tall like a castle gate. The garden was trimmed and clean. Every flower stood straight as if waiting for someone important. A woman stepped out of the car. Her name was Amara Toussaint. She had brown skin like smooth earth, eyes sharp like glass, and hair pulled into a soft bun. She wore a dark coat that reached her knees and held a small leather bag in one hand. She walked slowly but with purpose. Her eyes looked around with care. She did not smile, but she did not frown either. The driveway was already full. Shiny cars lined the path. People in suits and long coats stood near the door, chatting and sipping from paper cups. Some laughed. Some checked their watches. No one looked at Amara. When they did, they stared with puzzled eyes. One woman whispered to another, "Do you think she works here?" "No idea," the other answered. "Maybe she's the driver." Amara heard them but kept walking. Her heels clicked softly on the stone as she climbed the steps to the front door. Inside, the air was warm. A giant fireplace crackled at one end of the grand hall. Paintings of old men and women with tight lips hung on every wall. A golden chandelier sparkled above. Everything smelled like wood and old paper. The voices inside dropped when Amara entered. Heads turned. One man, tall with silver hair and a sharp suit, raised an eyebrow. His name was Douglas Vane. He looked Amara up and down like she was a question he did not like. "Are you lost?" he asked, his voice dry. "No," Amara said. That was all. A woman in high heels stepped closer. Her dress was bright red and her necklace shone like ice. Her name was Whitney Calloway. She tilted her head and smiled, but the smile did not reach her eyes. "This is a private family matter," Whitney said, her voice smooth but thin. "You might be in the wrong place." "I was invited," Amara replied. Before anyone could speak again, a tall woman with glasses and a large folder entered the hall. She wore a gray skirt suit and walked with quick steps. Her name was Pamela Drayton, the lawyer for the late Bernard Calloway. Everyone fell quiet when they saw her. "We will begin shortly," Pamela said. "Please follow me to the drawing room." Everyone obeyed. Douglas rolled his eyes. Whitney made a small sound in her throat. People walked ahead, whispering in low voices. Amara followed behind them without a word. She moved like a shadow. The drawing room was wide and bright. Long windows let in pale light. Chairs were arranged in a circle around a low table with a silver tray of water and glasses. Pamela stood near the fireplace and opened her folder. Amara chose a seat near the corner. No one sat next to her. Douglas sat in the biggest chair. Whitney crossed her legs and tossed her hair. A younger man chewed gum loudly. An older woman sighed and looked at her nails. No one looked pleased to be there. Pamela cleared her throat. "Thank you all for coming," she said. "As you know, we are here to carry out the final wishes of Bernard Calloway. This is the reading of his will." Some people nodded. Others leaned forward. Whitney grinned like she already knew she would be rich. Douglas crossed his arms and waited. Pamela continued. "Mr. Calloway was clear about how he wanted things done. There will be no debate, no questions. What is written here is final." A heavy silence filled the room. Amara looked down at her hands. She did not fidget. Pamela took a breath and began to read. The room stayed still, but hearts beat faster. Something was coming. Something no one expected. And Amara just sat there, quiet as stone. The fire in the drawing room crackled softly. Its warmth touched the walls and made the paintings look alive for a moment. Outside, the clouds hung low over the hills like a thick blanket. But inside, the air felt tight and still, like it was holding its breath. Every person in the room sat straight in their chair, some with eager smiles, others with furrowed brows. All eyes were on Pamela Drayton as she held the long envelope in her hands. She looked around slowly, making sure each face saw her calm expression. Her voice was steady as she spoke. Bernard Calloway's will was signed 3 months before his passing. He wrote it himself, but it was reviewed and confirmed by our legal office. He made his wishes very clear. The room was silent. Whitney tapped one red nail against the side of her chair. Douglas gave a short sigh through his nose but said nothing. The younger man in the back stopped chewing his gum for a moment. Amara sat quietly in the same corner, her hands resting on her lap, her eyes focused on Pamela. She did not blink much. Pamela turned the first page and began to read. To my beloved granddaughter, Whitney Calloway, I leave the beach house in Cape Rowan, along with the art pieces stored in the West Gallery. I hope you find peace there and use the space to reflect on what truly matters. Whitney smiled widely and leaned back in her chair. Her eyes sparkled with pride. She looked around the room as if expecting applause. No one clapped. Pamela continued reading without pause. To my nephew, Douglas Vane, I leave the Calloway bookstore chain, which includes 10 locations and their full staff. You once told me that knowledge was power. I hope you use it wisely. Douglas nodded once, his lips tight. He had expected more. He had always wanted the company headquarters and the estate itself. Still, he said nothing. To my godson, Jeremy North, I leave the mountain cabin and my entire hunting collection. You always brought laughter to my final years, and I thank you for that. The man with the gum smiled, clearly pleased. A few others received small gifts, a collection of watches, a locked box of letters, an old painting from the dining hall. The room began to buzz with quiet voices. People looked at each other and nodded. Some smiled, some did not. Then Pamela raised her hand and the room grew still again. There is one final part of the will, she said. Her tone was different now, slower, heavier. Her eyes flicked for a moment toward Amara. Several heads turned. To the one who showed me kindness when I had nothing left to offer. To the one who sat with me when I could not speak. To the one who listened when everyone else only talked. I leave the heart of everything I built. Silence filled the room like thick fog. No one moved. Pamela looked down and read the next part carefully. I, Bernard Calloway, leave the entire Ferndale estate, including all land and property, to Amara Toussaint. I leave the company shares of Calloway Industries to her name. I leave the art vault, the family vault, the bank accounts, and all personal items of value to her. From this day forward, she is the legal owner of everything I have created. A chair creaked. A glass wobbled on the table. Whitney blinked fast and leaned forward. Her voice rose like a siren. What? That has to be a mistake. Pamela did not look at her. She read the next line. This is not a gift of pity. This is not a favor. Amara is the only one I trust to carry forward my legacy with honor, wisdom, and strength. Let no one question this decision. Douglas stood up, his face red. His voice was sharp and cold. Who is she? She does not belong here. She is not family. Pamela closed the folder and looked up. Her voice did not shake. This is Bernard Calloway's will. It is final. Amara Toussaint is now the rightful heir. Whitney stood too, her face twisting. This is ridiculous. She is not even related to us. She is just some outsider. Some nobody. This must be fake. Pamela replied calmly. This was written by Bernard himself. Witnessed. Sealed. Confirmed by law. It cannot be changed. All eyes turned to Amara. She had not moved. She had not spoken. Her face was calm, but her hands were no longer resting. They were folded, tight and still. Her eyes met Whitney's, then Douglas's. She did not blink. Douglas stepped forward. You must have done something. You tricked him. What were you to him? A nurse? A stranger? Amara stood. Her voice was quiet, but strong enough to stop every whisper in the room. I was someone who cared when all of you stayed away. Her words dropped like stones. The room froze again. Pamela stepped aside. The papers were signed. The keys were placed on the table. No one reached for them but Amara. Outside, the clouds slowly began to move. A soft light broke through the sky. The fire crackled behind her as she picked up the keys and placed them in her bag. She looked around the room once more. No one spoke now. What had once been a day for greedy smiles had turned into something else. The air was no longer filled with pride. Now it was thick with shock. And in the center of it all stood Amara Toussaint, the woman no one saw coming. The drawing room was silent, the kind of silence that holds too many words behind it. Some people were frozen in their chairs. Others looked around as if the walls might give them answers. Only the fire moved. It flickered gently and tossed shadows on the faces that now showed more confusion than pride. Amara stood by the window. She had not said much. She did not need to. The will had spoken for her. The name Bernard Calloway still rang through the air like an old bell. But now it was tied to her. It was hers to carry. Douglas Vane paced near the door. His shoes tapped the floor again and again. His mouth opened like he wanted to speak, but no sound came out. He looked at Pamela with eyes full of fire. "There has to be a way to challenge this," he said at last. "This is not fair. This is not how things are done." Pamela did not look afraid. She had seen many men like Douglas. She placed her papers back in her briefcase and said in her calm voice, "There is no legal ground for challenge. Everything was signed and sealed. You heard the words yourself." Bernard knew what he was doing. Whitney Calloway leaned forward. Her arms were crossed. Her voice was sharper than ever. "She does not belong here. I do not care what some paper says. She is not one of us. She is not even a Calloway." Amara turned slowly. She looked directly at Whitney. "You are right," she said. "I am not a Calloway by name, but I was more family to Bernard than any of you ever were." Gasps rose like smoke in the room. Pamela looked up. Douglas narrowed his eyes. Whitney laughed, but it was not a real laugh. It was short and bitter. "You expect us to believe that Bernard spent time with you in secret? That he gave everything to you out of love? You are not even the same as us. You think you could ever be his equal?" Amara stepped forward. Her voice did not rise, but it grew stronger. "My mother was Lena Toussaint. Maybe that name does not mean much to you, but it should." Whitney stopped smiling. Douglas stopped pacing. Pamela slowly turned her head. She seemed to know the name. Her lips parted just a little. Amara continued. "She was the head nurse at the Silver Pines Recovery Home. She worked there for many years. She was kind. She was brave. And she saved Bernard Calloway's life after his heart attack 12 years ago." The room was still again. Amara kept speaking. "My mother stayed by his side for weeks. He was scared and sick and quiet. But she talked to him. She helped him walk again. She made sure he took every pill and ate every meal. When he was sad and tired and wanted to give up, she stayed with him through the night." Amara's voice became softer. They became close. They talked every day. He trusted her. And when he came home, he tried to bring her with him. But someone told lies. Someone spread stories about my mother. Stories that got her fired. Whitney shifted in her chair. "That is a lie," she said. But her voice was not steady anymore. Amara nodded once. "You know it is not. Your mother made those calls. She did not want Bernard growing close to someone like my mother. A black woman from the East Side. A woman who dared to be seen." Pamela cleared her throat. Her eyes were wide now. "I remember the case," she said. "There was no proof. Just rumors. She was removed from the home. Quietly. No public notice. No chance to speak." Amara looked at her. "My mother was not even allowed to say goodbye. Bernard found her weeks later. She had already started working in a small clinic. They talked again. He said he was sorry. He said he believed her. And after she passed away 3 years ago, he kept calling me. He came to visit me. Every month. We sat in parks. We read books. We shared memories." Amara looked around the room again. "I never asked him for money. I never asked him for anything. But he gave me something anyway. He gave me his stories. He gave me his regrets. And when he got sick again, I was the one who sat by his bed every night." Whitney's face was pale. She had no more words. Douglas sat back down and looked at the floor. Amara breathed deeply and stepped closer to the fireplace. She looked up at the painting of Bernard above the mantel. His eyes seemed softer now, as if he could hear everything she was saying. "I did not come here to fight. she said. I came because he asked me to. I came because he told me he had something to say to all of you. He wanted to speak through the will. And he did. Pamela stepped forward. She opened a small envelope and pulled out a letter with Bernard's handwriting. Her voice was low as she read. To those gathered in my home, I am no longer with you in body, but my voice remains. I spent my final years thinking deeply about what matters. Not money, not titles, but people. The ones who care. The ones who love without asking for anything in return. Amara is that person. The room was silent as she continued. You may be shocked. You may be angry. That is fine. But I have watched my family grow greedy. I have seen kindness disappear from this house. Amara reminded me what it means to be human. What it means to be heard. That is why she is my true heir. Not because of her blood, but because of her heart. Pamela folded the letter and looked at Amara. No one else spoke. The room had changed. The air felt different, heavier, real. Amara walked to the table and picked up the last envelope. It held the official deed to the estate and the company shares. She placed it in her bag. Her hands no longer shook. She turned back one more time. I do not need you to understand, she said. But you will respect his choice. And you will respect me. That is the end of it. She left the room without looking back. Her steps were calm and steady. She walked through the grand hall with its paintings and chandeliers and opened the wide door to the fresh air outside. For the first time in years, Ferndale Estate belonged to someone who had earned it not by name but by love. The wind had picked up by the time Amara stepped outside the heavy front doors of Ferndale Estate. The trees that lined the long driveway swayed gently, and dry leaves danced in the air like whispers. The sky had begun to clear, but small dark clouds still drifted slowly across the horizon, stubborn and unmoved. Amara stood on the stone steps for a moment, not ready to leave, not quite ready to stay. Behind her, the walls of the house were still full of voices and tension. She could almost feel the weight of their stares through the thick windows. She walked toward the garden path. Her steps were careful and slow. The flowers were in perfect rows, and the fountain in the center still poured water into its marble bowl, calm and steady. Bernard had loved this garden. He used to say the roses reminded him that even beauty had thorns. Amara smiled softly at the memory. She sat on a stone bench near the edge of the pond. For the first time that day, she let herself feel the weight of everything. Her chest felt tight. Her throat burned with all the words she had wanted to say and had held back. She took a deep breath and tried to steady her thoughts. Back inside the estate, the storm was still brewing. Whitney had locked herself in one of the upstairs rooms, her voice echoing through the old wooden doors as she called her mother, and then her lawyer, and then another lawyer. Each call ended in the same frustrated silence. The will was final. There was nothing anyone could do. Douglas Vane sat in the library with a glass of dark liquor in his hand. He stared at the fireplace but saw nothing. His mind kept turning back to that moment when Amara had said her mother's name. Lena Toussaint. He remembered her now. She had been quiet and kind. Too kind for this place. Too brave to back down when others had tried to push her out. He remembered hearing the whispers. He remembered ignoring them. Pamela Drayton walked through the halls slowly. She touched the walls, the shelves, the little tables lined with silver frames. She had known Bernard Calloway longer than anyone in that house. She had been his lawyer for 30 years and his friend for almost as long. She had watched his family drift away from him as his power grew. She had seen the greed grow like weeds in the cracks of his legacy. And she had seen how his face softened when he spoke about Amara, about Lena, about the things he had done wrong, about the people he wanted to make things right with before it was too late. By that evening, the estate was quieter. Most of the distant relatives and greedy guests had left. They had no reason to stay. The gold they had dreamed of was gone. The paintings they had hoped to fight over were not theirs. The land, the name, the heart of the Calloway family was no longer theirs to claim. Amara remained in the guest room she had been given. It was not the biggest room in the house, but it had a window that faced the hills. The room smelled like cedar and lavender. She sat at the desk with a notebook in front of her. She had always kept one close. Bernard had encouraged her to write. He said her thoughts deserved a home. She wrote slowly that night. She wrote about her mother, about the strength in her voice and the softness in her hands, about the days when Lena came home tired from work but still managed to smile. She wrote about the lies that had tried to bury her. She wrote about the fire inside her that refused to go out. She wrote about Bernard, about the man who had once made a mistake and spent years trying to fix it. She wrote about their conversations, about the time he brought her hot tea and a book of poems, about the day he cried when he spoke her mother's name. She wrote about the faces in that drawing room, the shock in their eyes, the disbelief, the anger. But she also wrote about the silence that came after, the silence that told her they knew the truth but could not face it. The next morning, Amara went down to the kitchen. The staff had not left. They knew her now. They had served her tea with quiet respect. One of them, a woman named June, gave her a kind smile. "You remind me of your mother," June said. "She used to visit the back kitchen when Bernard was sick. She would bring us little cakes. Said we worked harder than the people upstairs." Amara smiled. She felt something settle in her chest, a thread connecting past and present. Later that day, a black car rolled up the long driveway. A reporter stepped out. He had heard about the will. He wanted a quote. He wanted a story. But Amara refused to come outside. She sent June to tell him she had nothing to say. The next day, a blog post appeared online. It was full of false rumors. It said Amara had tricked an old man, that she had used pity to steal a fortune, that she was not worthy of the Calloway name. Other websites copied the story. Comments appeared by the hundreds. Some were cruel. Some were worse than cruel. Amara read them all, every single word. Then she closed the laptop and went out into the garden. She stood in front of the fountain. Her eyes were steady. She did not cry. The truth was not soft. It was not clean. It did not come with applause. But it was hers. Pamela came to see her later that week. They sat under the tall tree near the backfield. The grass was long and the breeze was gentle. "He wrote something else for you," Pamela said, handing her a sealed envelope. Amara opened it slowly. Inside was a short letter in Bernard's handwriting. "I hope they never break your spirit. I hope you rise and rise again. You were the truth I was afraid to speak. Now you are the voice I leave behind." Amara folded the letter and placed it in her coat pocket. She looked at the hills. She looked at the house. She looked at the road where the lies had come and where the truth would walk someday. And she whispered to the wind, "I am not afraid." Morning came softly. The sun peeked over the rolling hills like it was shy. The dew on the grass sparkled like tiny diamonds. The birds were louder than usual, as if they were singing to someone special. Ferndale Estate stood quiet and tall beneath the light, its windows catching the sun's warmth for the first time in what felt like a long time. Inside the great house, everything was still. But it was not the cold stillness of old secrets. It was a peaceful kind of quiet, like the house itself was resting after a storm. Amara Toussaint opened her eyes as the light streamed across her pillow. She did not jump up. She did not rush. She lay there for a moment, letting the sun reach her skin. She felt different, not because she now owned land and property and shares, not because the world had finally learned her name, but because her voice had been heard, and her mother's story had been spoken out loud. She rose from the bed and wrapped herself in a soft robe. She walked barefoot through the hallway and down the grand staircase. Her footsteps were calm and steady. She stopped at the bottom and took in the wide walls covered in paintings. Each one showed a proud face, mostly men, all of them fair-skinned, all of them looking out into the future like they expected to be remembered. She turned left and entered the drawing room, where it had all begun. The chairs were still there. The fireplace was still warm, but the tension was gone. It was just a room now, a room with history but also with space for something new. She sat at the same table where Pamela had read the will. She opened her notebook and began to write. But this time she was not writing about pain. She was writing about plans. Later that morning, Amara met with Pamela in the study. "I want to open the estate to the community," Amara said. "I want to build something here, not just keep it all locked away." Pamela smiled. "That would have made Bernard proud. I want a museum wing for Lena, for the women who worked without being seen. I want scholarships for Black girls who never thought a name like Calloway could belong to them. I want the truth to live here, out loud, not in whispers." Pamela placed her hand gently over Amara's. "You have more power than they ever expected, but you also have more grace than they ever earned." The news spread quickly. Some people clapped. Some people shook their heads. The press came again. This time Amara faced them. She stood on the front steps in a simple blue dress. Her curls were pulled back. Her voice was clear. "I did not come here to erase anyone. I came to shine light on what was hidden. This is not revenge. This is restoration. This is what happens when truth is louder than lies." The headlines changed. Words like bold and historic filled the pages. But Amara knew the real victory was not in the articles or the interviews. The real victory was in the people who began to believe again. Teachers brought students to see the estate. Artists painted murals on the garden walls. Writers asked to use the drawing room for readings. The halls echoed with new footsteps. Laughter returned to the air. Whitney and Douglas stayed away. Their pride was a heavy thing, too hard to carry back up that driveway. But Amara did not wait for their return. She did not need it. One afternoon, a woman from the East Side Clinic arrived with a bouquet of yellow roses. "Your mother held my hand while I gave birth," the woman said. "She told me I was strong when no one else did." Amara accepted the flowers with tears in her eyes. On another day, a man in a blue uniform knocked on the gate. He handed Amara a small box. "Your mother gave me this Bible when I was sick. I promised I would give it back to her someday. Now I give it to you." Amara placed it on the mantel beside Bernard's photograph. The years moved forward. Ferndale Estate no longer belonged to shadows and secrets. It belonged to children's laughter and Sunday poetry readings. It belonged to gardeners and students and musicians. It belonged to stories that had been quiet for too long. Amara Toussaint never tried to be a Calloway. She made her own name shine. And through her strength, through her grace, through her fire and love and truth, she made sure her mother was never forgotten. She made sure Black girls could walk through those doors and know they were never outsiders. She turned the place where she had once been humiliated into a home for honor, a home for healing, a home for truth. Now you, dear reader, who followed Amara's journey from silence to strength, from rejection to recognition, from outsider to rightful heir, let this story remind you of something powerful. Let it remind you that truth cannot be hidden forever, that kindness is stronger than cruelty, that love lives longer than lies, and that your story matters, even when others try to erase it. If the story moved you, if you believe in lifting voices like Amara's and Lena's, if you want more tales where justice rises and dignity wins, like this story, subscribe to hear more truths told loud and proud. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that they are enough. Because every voice deserves a chapter, and every chapter deserves to be heard.